Hello and welcome from the Clinical Nurse Specialist Association of British Columbia, or CNSABC for short. We like to host regular webinars and networking events for the benefit of clinical nurse specialists from across BC. And really, these webinars and events are for anyone with an interest in knowledge translation, quality improvement, or an interest in improving our healthcare system.
Thank you again for having us. We're as two of the new CNSs in Indigenous Cultural Safety in the province. We'll take an opportunity to talk about what Indigenous cultural safety can look like in practice, and a bit about what the work of maybe CNSs in general can look like in this realm, and why this work belongs to all of us. So start us off in a good way. Thank you, Sherry, for your territory acknowledgement to start the meeting. I will start with acknowledging that I'm joining today from the unceded, stolen traditional and current homelands of many Halkmaon speaking peoples, specifically the Kikite Nation here in New Westminster. I'm incredibly fortunate that this is where I get to live and raise my family, and as an uninvited guest, and I've been an uninvited guest in these territories and the adjacent territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples for many, many, many years, and try to be mindful of my role and responsibilities as someone who, again, is not of these territories, and I commit to doing my work in my job and in my home and in how I raise my family to be respectful and uplift the original inhabitants and the rightful rights and title holders of these territories. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge that the struggles against colonialism and the colonial harms and genocide that has happened in these territories and the territories across Turtle Island are deeply interconnected to the harms and genocides and humanitarian crises around the world. So our work is local and very large, and done in solidarity with Indigenous peoples across the world. Yeah, I'm Jessica. I come from the Musqueam Nations on my dad's side, settler British Irish on my mom's side. And yeah, I've been a CNS in Indigenous Cultural Safety since July. I started with Vancouver Coastal Health, and a couple weeks ago I made the shift over to Providence. It's a brand new role, brand new sphere of CNS practice, and I'm so grateful that I have colleagues in this work and co-conspirators in this work, because it is a unique portfolio. And to consider it a portfolio, I don't know is quite the right term. I haven't, I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to talk about the work that we do, and the scope and the breadth and the depth and the full picture of the work that we do. So with that, I'll turn it to Atussa to acknowledge and introduce herself.
Thanks so much for that, Jessica. So hello, everyone. I'm Atussa Behnam-Shabahang. I'm the CNS with Indigenous Cultural Safety with Fraser Health. So currently, I'm just acknowledging my deep respect for living on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. This is also colonially known as Surrey Central. This is also the chosen home of the Surrey Delta Métis Association. And so I've also been able to have the privilege of being on these lands since I was immigrated here from the age of 5. So I am a first generation settler, and I was born in Europe. However, I'm of Persian ancestry. And for me, like land acknowledgements are very important to understand my story and positionality, and then to honor the host communities on the homes of those that I'm a guest on. So I think I really appreciate Jessica's approach, and for me, it's just about bringing that awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights into our everyday lives in order to engage authentically in this. So, a land acknowledgement is only part of this equation, and it needs to be paired with action. And so hopefully we'll be able to have some of those thoughts and outcomes in our session today.
Thank you, Atussa, and for the reminder of the purpose of the protocol of territory acknowledgement. And it's really a multifaceted practice. And in some ways we get to learn a bit more about each other. In some ways we get to really like reflect on our interconnectedness in our own journeys, but in our interconnectedness in the places in which we gather or in the places in which we live and work. And a really intentional awareness about that interconnectedness is a big part of the Indigenous cultural safety work, and a big part of reconciliation work and decolonization work. And so it's so much more than a line item on an agenda. It really is an intentional practice. So I hope that that's something that folks are engaging in their own learning journeys. I like to start any of my sessions off with just setting some intentions. This is a teaching I've picked up along the way from a few different folks, but sometimes these conversations can be tricky. There's still there's a lot of sensitive maybe terminology, or challenging some kind of like maybe deeply held beliefs or things we don't even know that we deeply hold. And so I just like to be honest and upfront about that, and that we're trying to create brave spaces where we can engage together in supportive and respectful ways. And and we talk about brave space as opposed to a safe space, because that discomfort, uncomfortable feelings, or not so nice feelings sometimes is part of the learning and it's part of the journey. So we make space for that and we honor that part of the process. And we come in together with open hearts and open minds, and a willingness to meet together as humans, as leaders, as nurses, and but humans first and foremost, and that we approach our work with love and humility. And we welcome questions and discussion that comes up here. So yeah, to set up some definitions, concepts, just shared understanding. When we talk about Indigenous cultural safety, and this is both of our job titles, Indigenous cultural safety is the outcome of a transformation in norms and practices and the culture of healthcare. So it's the moving the culture and norms of healthcare and our healthcare practice and our systems, so that care that is delivered and care that is received is experienced as free from harm, racism, and discrimination. And this is determined by the person receiving care. So it goes well beyond Indigenous culture and cultural practices. That is one piece of someone being able to experience care as culturally safe. However, it's very much about that transformation in the norms and the ways in which we all, as practitioners within the system, do our work and relate to each other, relate to our clients and patients and families, the ways in which our care is delivered. So it's really big. It's really big ideas and work. And one of the directions I've seen the discussions of cultural safety go is really focusing on that delivery of culturally responsive care, which is important, but only one aspect of it. Another kind of essential piece of this journey is Indigenous-specific anti-racism as a necessary practice development as we move towards cultural safety. We're not going to get to the delivery of safe and effective care for folks if people are experiencing racism every time they access healthcare. And we know that Indigenous-specific racism, anti-Indigenous racism, is prevalent in our BC healthcare system, and we know that from the In Plain Sight report. which was, of course, released in 2020. And while a lot has changed in the 3.5 years since that was published, we have a long way to go as a system and as professions. Indigenous cultural safety is the work of everyone. Again, we're looking at how the system of the culture of the whole system changes, so that everyone has a role to play. Anyone from that frontline nurse taking someone's vitals at the bedside, to us in our CNS roles, to operations leaders, to and everyone kind of in between and beyond. And Indigenous cultural safety shows up in every corner of our system as well. Again, from that direct care component to our how we write our policies, to how we design spaces, to HR like how HR is kind of delivered and carried out. So if you're still figuring out how Indigenous cultural safety is relevant to your work, please keep engaging in figuring that out, because it belongs everywhere. And it's an ongoing journey. Education, training are one piece, but as leaders, we have a responsibility to embed ICS throughout our work and take that learning into action. The learning journey is ongoing, and so we can't wait until we feel like I know everything I need to know and now I can take action. We have to do that in an iterative way if we're going to see the transformation that I know is possible, and we'll get there.
Thanks for starting us off, Jessica. So we have this figure here from Health Canada. It's been adapted many times, and there's many different versions of it, which may be familiar to you. So the image really outlines cultural safety as the outcome, as the main bubble there on the bottom. And you can see that there's like the multiple bubbles around is really kind of demonstrating this continuum that Jessica was talking about, that it really is this like ongoing work. So in our roles, we focus on working with Indigenous communities or with populations that are really like across so many different settings, and if you start to reflect and think about your work, you can start to see kind of where some of these concepts and components will really start to kind of come together to build that foundation of cultural safety. So cultural safety is about creating that safe engagement in recognizing and addressing the power imbalances that exist within our healthcare systems. The concept is primarily, in this case, within the context of Indigenous specific cultural safety. And because of this is where we're seeing the negative health disparities. So this could mean in the environment, physical, socially, emotionally, and spiritually safe. It also really kind of stems from a freedom from any harm from racism or discrimination that we have seen in important documents like in plain sight reports. In order to practice cultural safety, we need to understand really those colonial and sociopolitical and historical events that have led to these disparities for Indigenous people. So to understand and help us recognize that, we need to really look at those little lower bubbles that you see there that are kind of like the influencing factors. So we have anti-racism, cultural humility, and trauma-informed care. And Jessica had a really good suggestion to add another bubble. So this red bubble here is actually an addition to have access to culturally responsive care. In this bubble, we have Indigenous wellness liaisons. Did I get that right? And I think that's for Providence Health. Indigenous health liaisons for in Fraser Health, and Indigenous maternal liaisons, elders, also access to sacred spaces and traditional medicines, which all really are influencing factors to contribute to cultural safety. So generally in this continuum, we would be starting in cultural awareness, which really is just the acknowledgement that there is a difference. You're noticing that there is others, and that you know that it's different from your own. The cultural competence is just your ability to reflect on one's own culture and how these impact the way one provides the one provides care and ongoing learning to deepen your understanding of another's culture. Cultural sensitivity really is just a little extension of cultural awareness, where now you've become aware of the differences, and now you're understanding that those differences need to be respected. And as you work through these bubbles to contribute to cultural safety, you may learn more in this ongoing continuum and kind of always come back to it. The important piece here is that it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop learning, and if you do, then it just means that there is just that it almost could be a little bit of a slide back. So I think the ongoing learning is very key and foundational in this work. I also just want to mention that this is very rudimentary. The concepts of cultural awareness, competence, and sensitivity are the basis, and in order to really be a part of transformational care, we have to be pushing past this. And I think that that's where a lot of the hard work is where we're realizing where the barriers are to equity. We're seeing the health disparities and really trying to have deeper understandings of these areas. So I just want to mention that, although that this is a nice image to show the basis of what cultural safety is and how that we may achieve it. It really is just the very, very beginning of a journey. And so with that, we'd like to engage with some questions about where you feel that you would be on this journey. And starting off with the first question, what are your strengths on this continuum?
Okay, yeah, no, I just have a question. I don't think that necessarily have lots of strengths, and I am probably like everyone else at the beginning of the journey, despite taking all of the courses. But at my work as a surgical CNS, I do have access to probably more data than some other specialties, and kept constantly asked the question about if I can provide the data, the differences in a surgical outcome between Indigenous patients and patients from other group. The problem is we have not been able to systemically identify patients. I really don't know who they are. So far right now, it's still on voluntary basis. We are asking questions, and we're getting better, because we have a really great, fantastic Indigenous health and wellness team at St. Paul's, but they also only engage with people that we know and that are Indigenous and they then want to help. But yeah, I'm still struggling about identifying who the patients are in order to be able to compare the data, for example, like for the elective surgery patients. one side, and for the patients that are coming through emergency, different sets of data. Like in emergency would be for me, maybe are they waiting longer? Are they treating the same? And they get access to consult at the same time. When they are scheduled for surgery, do they wait longer than non-Indigenous? I don't know if I cannot identify them. So my question is, how can we at least know who the patients are, so to know what exactly the extent of the problem is, at least for the care outcomes?
Thanks for the question. So like generally I can say for Fraser Health, we have started an Indigenous self-identification process where in certain areas like an emergency and I think at primary care sites, there is a process where staff are able to ask if an individual self-identifies as Indigenous. And this data is collected, and we have a dashboard, and that we have developed in order to further understand and analyze the data. So generally, if they are in hospital, so are you with Fraser Health, or I'm not sure what we're gonna.
No,
yeah.
I am with Providence, and
Okay.
we requested like that, like with our electronic health records, so the ones
Right.
that we don't have to ask questions over and over again. So to me,
Yeah.
like if you ask question once and someone said yes, identified Indigenous, on the next encounter, the only question that is appropriate, in my opinion, is would you like the Indigenous Health and Wellness team to be part of your care team or not? And not to have to ask them every time when they come to emergency, how do you identify? So I like that's one of the things that we are working on,
Of course.
that we don't have solution. And also the other thing is, like, if someone says yes, there should be auto referral, like there should be some process that like flag the Indigenous Health and Wellness team, so that we can also ask the question, what is appropriate to, if we have it way to provide care, or like, you know, that a patient can have a benefits of having the Indigenous Health and Wellness team engagement, and also the staff can have a support when they have a question, or if they're unsure, like if they are taking the right approach. But like I would say, there is a tons of work done on collecting data about patient experience, especially coming through emergency. But I have, or maybe I'm a little bit impatient. Patience is not my virtue, I have to admit. But I was expecting by now that we would have something concrete.
I think you like brought up a few really good points. One, which is like the safety around asking an individual to self-identify. And you're right. I think that because I think healthcare systems have been historically such an unsafe place. Asking the question repeatedly can further cause further distrust and not be beneficial for building relationships. So I understand where you're coming from. I think generally from what I can share and understand from our system is that once it's been input into the system, then it will be on the file, and then we would be able to use that data. But any other insights, Jessica, that you may have?
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing up that opportunity, Maria.
Yeah.
We're very much in those still very early days of having really usable health, like Indigenous specific health data, and the ISI, the Indigenous self-identification process through Cerner or through other EHRs, is kind of our best tool and best mechanism at the moment, because historically, we've been working with like not good systematic data, and that's been really challenging across the board. And you're absolutely right. Like the process that we have in place is not perfect. It's only as good as the processes around like supporting it to be asked, to be input, to be accessed. So do staff in terms of making sure like we actually have the data to work with. Once someone gets to the point of being on the surgical unit or going into surgery, you know, do the staff working with that patient know about the Indigenous self-identification question? Do they know that they can check it in Cerner, whether it's been asked and answered? And because sometimes in emerge or sometimes in admitting, the clerk or the intake person might not ask the ISI or might ask it and the person might choose to just not answer at all. And then it's never prompted again. Like it never in Cerner, it never comes up again. And so it might just never be answered. And we might be missing that that data point. So it's absolutely appropriate for someone in the care team at a different point to go, you know, to make it a part of their practice when they're reviewing their patients in the morning or when they get a transfer, to go in to the patient, the PM conversations, and look at that demographic data and be like, was that answered? And can take it upon themselves to fill that in if it hasn't been, to ask someone to self-identify if they haven't been asked yet. So just in terms of helping support like the robustness of the data collection. And then there's some bigger stuff going on, and there's some actually kind of really exciting like measurement and outcomes and things like that happening at Providence that I just have not gotten into yet because I'm 2 weeks into the organization. So maybe one day in the future, Maria, we can come together and look at that a little bit more, because you're absolutely onto the right track of like, we need a better picture. We need to be able to look at this in these more kind of like concrete and systematic ways in our system and use the tools that we have. Like it's not for lack of options per se, but everybody has to we have to figure out, you know, the data is only as good as what gets put into it.
Exactly.
And so there is a responsibility for everyone in the organization to like take that on as well. And so I know that our team is working hard to get the word out about the ISI and helping folks feel comfortable asking, because it is a complex, like it's more complex of a question than it seems on its surface, and there's a lot of considerations that go into like how that is asked and at what point, and does it get revisited and things like that. But and it's supposed to be standard practice across the board that everyone coming in to register or for admission is asked. And I will admit that as a on the flip side, it is a bit of a weird question to be asked. I was really thrown off one time when I was taking my son to BC Children's for like outpatient blood work, and we were registering, and they asked me, are you Indigenous? And I was like, what? Why? Like, it really threw me, and it was so funny because I have been working on the ISI for years. So, you know, like I do get it. I do get that it's not like we're all kind of figuring that out in our system, but the only way to for it to get better and for it to get more comfortable and for it to get more established in our workflows is to continue doing it and to make that standard practice across the board.
We have the same challenges at Fraser Health about having everybody be asked, having it being accurately documented. And I just want to name that Canada is very new to collecting race-based data in general. Sherry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking at your questions here and thinking where we're at. And I work within the renal program at Fraser and do some provincial work too. We do ask provincially about race-based data. I'm finding increasingly it's quite narrow we're asking people to identify as one race or another. And I find that problematic at times because many of us come from mixed heritage. So that's one limitation. But aside from that, I think when I think about where our teams are, I would very much say we've made a lot of strides in terms of cultural awareness, but I think we have a long way to go before we actually move towards cultural safety in that dialysis population especially. I know historically that many folks in our rural and remote communities travel 3 times further to access dialysis from an Indigenous community than from, you know, your suburban population. So there's a lot that we still need to do around that.
Hi. Yeah, I can tell you that in the specialized seniors clinic where I work, the only way that we've been able to identify is, and we do it proactively, is because of where the referrals are coming from. And so, and we always ask that they bring an advocate along with them. Nevertheless, it is, if it's been asked before, we can't, it's not visible to the frontline staff where it's going to show up, number one. And number two is, I would be really interested in knowing whether those that have identified have seen any changes in their care, and if so, what was positive and what still needs work. The reason I'm asking this is that if one is hesitant to identify in case there are other implications that they are unaware of, then, and they fear it may do them harm in some way, it's a double-edged sword. And so that's where I have talked to my sister-in-law, who is Dene in Northwest Territories, and this is something she has also raised, is that it's the labeling, and we think we're doing better, but I'm not sure that we're not re-traumatizing at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Marcia. Thank you for raising it. And I know that that fear of re-traumatizing, or that fear of labeling, or that fear of upholding stereotypes, or that's one of the big pieces that's holding people back from engaging in the ISI. Like, as staff, I don't feel comfortable asking someone their race, because it's in one of the pieces that has risen through the literature and the feedback from patients and patient experience, and from conversations with Indigenous folks. One of the pieces that's been highlighted as a core dimension of culturally safe, experiencing care is culturally safe, is identity. And for an Indigenous person, not every Indigenous person, but for Indigenous people as a whole, what is emerging is that having their identity as an Indigenous person acknowledged and respected in their healthcare journey is integral to feeling safe in healthcare. So that's where the ISI comes in. That's where connecting folks to culturally relevant care, that's important. But that has come out in the literature, that has come out from patient reports and patient experience. So it's not the only part. Like, the ISI is just one tool, like one piece, like one action in all of the actions, but in that way that we can, as a healthcare system, as healthcare providers, affirm someone's identity and make space in their care journey for what their identity means to their holistic wellness and their holistic journey. that is something that's going to help them along in wellness. But it's really about the ways in which that is done, right? So how are staff prepared? Do they feel equipped to explain to somebody?
Fraser Health has come out with a new education program working together that has just launched. We have had like a small cohort of individuals in Fraser Health that has completed it. And then we were opening again for this week for National Indigenous Peoples Day month. So I think that we have that as kind of like our new ongoing education that we've started. And so I think that is just meant to be one layered component in addition to like the other education to help kind of consolidate and layer in knowledge as you practice. And I just wanted to speak to the point about the importance of cultural identity that you were speaking to, Jessica, because there's some literature done by Cedar that's based out of Vancouver that was really able to identify the importance of the closest and connection to culture, Indigenous culture, had a direct positive impact on health. So I think that goes hand in hand with supporting and minimizing and reducing barriers within healthcare, within practice, in order for that self-expression of identity and culture, and that access to culturally responsive care that I think really will have like positive impacts to health overall and outcomes. I just want to name that also, I think that in the conversation, there were many strengths that kind of did speak to a few of these bubbles, but I think we're going to move on to the next sphere, to the next slide on this. In our profession and we have professional and legislative responsibilities. So we're going to start off with the BCCNM, Indigenous Cultural Safety and Humility and Anti-Racism Practice Standards, that was published in 2022. In 2022, just a couple of years, 2 years ago. So the purpose of the standard is to set some clear expectations of how nurses are to provide culturally safe and anti-racist care for Indigenous clients or patients. There are a set of 6 core concepts and principles, and a lot of it was in response to the In Plain Sight report, which had copious amounts of evidence signifying that Indigenous specific racism within healthcare. It also does apply to physicians. In fact, I think it was created with, I think it was developed with physicians as well. Yes. Thanks, Yvonne. And so it was developed in response to that, and naming the detrimental health disparities, and lower co-developed. Yes, thank you. So the impacts include like lower life expectancy, higher infant mortalities, and increased presence of chronic illnesses. So also just drawing attention that this is a lot of deficit-based data, and that sometimes having so much deficit-based data can have a lot of negative repercussions when it comes to like the image of Indigenous health. So I don't like to always name that, and also just remembering that we can also have a strength-based approach and naming culture as an incredible strength. But just to kind of whip through some of these core competencies, you have self-reflection, which is the concept of It Starts With Me, and that's kind of the cultural humility piece. You have building knowledge through education, and that's looking for ways to improve cultural safe care. Anti-racism practice, so that's just about taking action. So really that's to identify, address, prevent, and eliminate Indigenous specific racism. You have creating safe healthcare experiences, person-led care, this is a relational care, and strength-based and trauma-informed practice. The next one here we have is the HSO standard. So this was developed by FNHA, MNBC. This is Métis Nation BC. Sorry, I'll say the acronyms out loud. This First Nations Health Authority, Métis Nation, British Columbia, by elders, knowledge keepers, community leaders, and also other clinical experts. And really what this standard is it reinforces your calls to action, and it specifies the requirements that BC health authorities have to do to deliver culturally safe care for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So I feel like this is actually, I think, one of a kind document that is going to be implemented within health authorities. So you may start to kind of like hear whispers of like the accreditation team starting to develop like self-assessments for this standard, and strategies on implementation. It does kind of consist of 8 main domains, and it is available on the Fraser Health Pulse site, which is on the last slide. So that's some work that is coming down the pipeline. That's really, really exciting. And then, of course, like UNDRIP and DRIPA. So we have UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration of oh no, what was the RIP? Oh no, I should remember.
The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
On the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, thank you. So this consists of 46 articles that is approved by the United Nations, and it recognizes the human rights of Indigenous people along with like all of their rights for self-determination. It was a really big deal for Canada to adopt in 2007, and it took some time to adopt here because it was rejected a few times by certain governments. And so once it was adopted, we have now DRIPA, which is more the provincial legal framework that now like respects the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, including their rights to health. There is a lot of information here, but I think the big takeaway is that the work, the anti-racism work, and the rights to respecting Indigenous rights is legislated in the work, and a lot of our work should be mirroring that. And that's when you see kind of the health standards. You see like our cultural safety and humility standards kind of all starting to follow suit. And so this is kind of like a really big paradigm shift when it comes to recognizing what rights means, the fact that we weren't doing it before, and now that we are obligated to do it. So I think that these are really big steps that influence what we need to be doing in our practice.
Yeah, thanks for that overview, Atussa. And yeah, as I think, especially when we talk about DRIPA, that's the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which is a BC legislation. That in that legislation, it outlines that the eradication of Indigenous specific racism as a key responsibility of the provincial government, and everyone underneath that, and everyone who within whom everyone who is kind of like falls under that legislation, which is all kind of all of us, and especially as actors of the provincial government and as citizens of BC and all of that, there's responsibilities associated with that. So really, the work of Indigenous cultural safety and Indigenous specific anti-racism, it cannot be just out of the goodness of someone's heart. This is a nice thing to do. It's like we have professional and legal responsibilities to take responsibility and accountability here, and we all do. It's not Indigenous health or Indigenous wellness and reconciliation. It's everyone, professionally and personally in this province, is a part of moving that forward. I love this quote. I've gone through a phase of a lot of my slides are just like Instagram posts and like quotes and images, because they really speak to me. But I love this because I think it's so important that when we have these big ideas, when we have these big like things that we agree with, that's like, yes, there should be no more racism. Like racism is not a good thing. That it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen because the government finally got their selves together to be like, oh yeah, that's a bad thing and maybe we should not endorse that anymore. That while, you know, it's really important that we have these these big frameworks that give guidance and impetus and, you know, kind of help direct where like some of our money and resources go, that change comes from individuals and comes from our own behavior and attitude changes, in the ways that we show up in our work, in the ways that we lead others, and the ways that we sometimes stumble through the imperfection of big systems transformation. And when we all do that together as a collective, big things happen. But we all have to pitch in and we all have to take responsibility for it. So that's, yeah, why I love this one so much. Atussa, is there another slide that you'd like to speak to as we wrap up?
I think maybe just the Lila Watson one.
Sure.
Just the quote. Yeah, so Lila Watson is a Maori activist, and this is a quote that always really resonated with me. And it says here, if you're here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And for me, it just really means that everybody has skin in the game. It means that you, yeah, as a you know, non-Indigenous or Indigenous person or a person of color, you everybody has something to gain from equity and reducing health disparities for others. So it doesn't take away anything from you, and working together is a I think is in the spirit of not having a savior complex, but wanting to understand that the work is for everybody.
Yeah, and I love this quote because it's really about honoring the work that's already been done and the strengths and capacity and autonomy and self-determination of people, but in our case, particularly Indigenous people, and that as non-Indigenous folks showing up to do the work, you're doing it alongside, and carrying the responsibilities that belong to non-Indigenous people. And there's a lot of responsibilities in this work that belong to non-Indigenous people. And because these systems are colonial systems, this society is a colonial society that we live in, and everyone who benefits from that society, everybody who lives in that society, it's your work to kind of figure out how to fix that and how to change that and how to make that safer and more equitable. And there's a lot of work that's been done and a lot of activism that's been done that's gotten us where we are today, which is we haven't got to where we are today from the benevolence of the provincial government. So it's really much come on the backs of Indigenous leaders, Indigenous activists, Indigenous nurses, and our comrades and co-conspirators who have upheld the work up to this point. So there are a ton of references and resources. I'm happy to share this slide deck so folks can look through the slides that we weren't able to get to. And there's a lot of links in there for folks to kind of delve into a little bit more. So we'll kind of maybe leave it there for now. And thank you so much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you for joining us. If you would like to learn more about our association, please visit our website at www.cnsabc.ca